Good afternoon, folks. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Now, high turnover, high sales businesses or sales per se means absolutely very little in measuring your business success, in measuring your business profitability. So for me, sales turnover is okay. It's an okay metric, but it's actually a waste of time if you're trying to grow your business, if you're trying to be profitable. And profit has got to be one of your main objectives when you're starting, growing, and developing your business. So the theme of my broadcast today is not just profit, but specifically one important profit metric, which all business owners, whether you're retailing, whether you're a service business, a manufacturer, even if you operate in the social enterprise space, arts, charities, and all the rest of it, gross profit, and certainly understanding what it is and how to use it, for me, is an absolutely critical thing to do. So for those of you who haven't come onto this broadcast before, seen it, a brief introduction. My name is Mahmood. I'm an accountant, very proud to be so, an educator, mentor. I've been, I suppose, working for quite a number of years here. I've been running my own business for the last 26 years. I've been fortunate over my 35, 40-year working career to have worked in private sector, public sector. I've worked overseas, in East Africa, Russia, Cuba. I've also worked in Europe. I've worked nationally. I've worked in the UK. I've worked across lots of different sectors. I'm not saying that just to get bragging rights, by the way, but for me, what I've learned from that is that irrespective of the sector that you're in, irrespective of the size of business organization that you are, there are certain commonalities that run across all businesses. And for me, it's that getting a bit closer, appreciating your numbers in your organization and your business is an absolute must if you are going to build a sustainable business and do more with it. On this live broadcast, which I do every week, and plus other things like podcasts and news articles, my objective, my overall mission is to share my enthusiasm, my appreciation and love of numbers with you. I'm not intending to turn any of you into accountants, even though I've taught professional students before. If you want to do that, I'm sure you can pursue an alternative path. But it's to make you appreciate the power of numbers, how it can reduce your anxiety, how it's very cathartic, how it actually makes you build a stronger business base there as well. All the other attributes that we require to run businesses are absolutely essential, but numbers, certainly being closely acquainted with those numbers, is an absolute must. Over the broadcast, I cover a range of topics from management information stuff that we need to know, tax. So effectively, we will be, as we go through, rotating lots of different topics that affect small businesses as well as the larger scale businesses as well. If you're just coming onto the broadcast, if you've stumbled across it, thank you very much for your company today. If you're coming onto it, type in that hashtag replay comment. If you've got a comment, suggestion, comment or question, pop it into the comments box. I will pick it up and deal with it accordingly. Now you're probably sitting at home thinking, great, Mahmood, that's a great introduction. Now let's crack on with today's show. So I said at the beginning, it's about gross profit. And let me just, by the power of magic, I'm going to show you what we're going to cover. And also for today, what I'm also going to do, and I'm going to try and blend this into the show as we go through, there's going to be some interactive elements and dimensions built in. And what that means is, my viewpoint would be that as business owners, and again, whether that's in an SME, whether that's in a social enterprise organization, whether that's a charity, an arts organization, a multinational, it's not about understanding the mechanics of the calculation, even though that's useful. It's not about you being skilled mathematicians and adept with the calculator. That number crunching that's so critical to feed in, okay, I'm going to give you some free online tools that you can tap in. So it's building up an awareness of what those figures actually mean and how we can tap into them there. So as far as today's session is concerned, what are we going to be covering? So the emphasis is on gross profit. I will introduce the alternative terms that other people use to describe it. So we're going to focus specifically on that profit metric. We're going to look about how we measure it, how we calculate it. During the course of this short broadcast, I'm going to be sharing an online tool with you. I'll share you the link as well. Tap into our website. It's there for you to use. So we're going to look at the measuring of it. How does that actually happen? I'm going to give you some tips and advice how you apply that in your own business. Now, measuring is half the battle. Managing what that metric actually says for making those key important decisions about how we use it to run our business, how we get some good insights and management data, I'm going to share with you as well. I'm going to look at two applications, and for me, gross profit is such a powerful number that it can be used in so many different scenarios and situations. The two that I'm going to dip my toe into the water on today is something called Breakeven. I'll overview what Breakeven actually is, but more specifically, because I want this to be a practical application for your businesses, is how do you actually figure it out for your own business? And it's not going to shock you, by the way, is that I've got an online tool to share with you where if you get some appreciation of your own business numbers, then you can actually calculate Breakeven for your own business. But not only that, there's lots more information that you can establish to not only understand where you are now, but how you can actually move forward with that knowledge. I'm also going to look at pricing, by the way. Now, pricing in the 26 years that I've been running my own business, when I taught pricing to clients, believe it or not, there are about 25, 26 different models that you can have out there. They all distill down to 3 or 4 basic frameworks. I'm going to dip my toe a little bit on pricing towards the end of this broadcast, and I'm going to give you a more detailed exposition on pricing in a future broadcast. So those are two powerful applications. So let's proceed on. I suppose the first thing is to think is, what do we actually understand and what do we actually mean by gross profit? Accountants, finance people have a tendency to use terms, and a variation on those terms will arise. So let's have a look at what we mean by them. So if this works, look at that, isn't that impressive? So we'll look at the first of all, measuring GP, and I've abbreviated this little mnemonic called SAG. So there's 3 key numbers that you need to understand, the 3 key numbers you need to extract, 3 key numbers that your accounting systems need to be able to capture from your transactions and tell you what those 3 individual numbers are. So let's have a look what we mean by SAG. And these are 3 key numbers that you need that all your accounting systems should be able to track. If you don't know what they are by the way currently, then I would strongly suggest that you revisit how you track your numbers, how you record your financial transactions, because underpinning all of this is you need to make sure your accounting systems are fit for purpose. Now, it's not really a massive a spoiler alert. My personal preference would be whether you're what I call an acorn business, maybe generating 4 or 5 figures worth of turnover, or you're actually a multinational, or you're generating significant turnover in your business, you need to go cloud and digital. If you're not worried about that and you think, I'm quite happy doing the work that I'm doing, I've got a lifestyle business, I've got my work-life balance perfectly sorted out, I've got a number of clients that I'm looking after, and that's how I want to run my business, I think that's brilliant, then, you could actually argue you don't actually need to worry too much. But my personal philosophy would be that all businesses, whatever size you are, if you do not grow, you're actually going backwards as a result. Inflation erodes the value of what you're selling. Customers will leave you, whoever you are. Costs will go up. So therefore, you need to keep, I'll use it, hustling. You need to keep thinking of different ways to actually operate your business and to grow and to actually make more profit. So what do we mean by this SAG? Now, first number is you need to be able to capture is the value of what you're selling. Now, probably stating the obvious. So when you invoice a customer, if you're a retailer, when you've got cash sales, if you're a service business providing things like training courses, coaching and the like, somewhere you need to be able to work out the value of what it is you're selling. Now, if you're a retailer, if you're a manufacturer, you're going to be a product-based business, you're going to be measuring the value of what you sell, and my advice would be to look down at the per unit basis. So first of all, let's think about measuring the value of what you're selling on to your end customer. The next thing you need to identify with what you're selling is what are called the associated or the link costs with that sale. Now, different terms that you may have come across in your business. You may have come across something called cost of sale. It's a very laboured term, I think. It's not very user-friendly here, but all it says is, and let me illustrate this by example. Now, if you work in the hospitality sector, which I did in my former life, so let's say you're a licensee, you're selling drinks. Well, effectively, you know the value of what a pint of beer, a glass of wine, a glass of orange juice would be. That's one figure. Against that, you need to be able to know what the purchase price is of buying that said glass of wine, pint of beer, glass of orange juice. So those two link together. If you're a retailer, so you're selling goods to your end customer, you know what the value of the sale is to that customer. You should be able to associate that with what the value of the purchase has been, the cost to you in your business. If you're in the food business, when you sell a food item to a customer, whether it's delivery or in-house, you know, or you should know, what the associated cost of making and preparing that meal has been, made up of the raw ingredients, the cost perhaps of the chef's times. Now, if you're a service-based business, you're delivering, say, maybe something online, eventually it will be in-person type events. Well, you may have associated costs of delivery, things like venue hire, things like printing costs of any materials that you may have to incur. So all this idea is, when you sell something on, there's an idea of what's called linked associated costs for delivering that particular item. Now, if you're a haulier, by the way, just to give you a variety of how this works. So you're a haulier, you've got a customer that you're delivering goods for, your delivery driver. Well, your associated cost of delivery for that customer would be your fuel costs. Now, the last thing, the G element, is actually the gross profit. So sales value of that transaction, less the associated costs, which very boringly are called cost of sales, gives you your gross profit. Now, that's the start point. Now, what I'm going to throw into the mix here, lots of businesses in aggregate terms, in total, can tell you what they've sold during the course of the week, during the course of the month. They can potentially tell you what their associated costs are, the purchasing costs of those materials, the cost of producing that meal, the cost of delivering those goods to the end customer, the cost of the printed material for a course they're running. And that's great. However, you're missing a big trick. Knowing what it is overall is useful to an extent, but actually we need to go one step further. And that one step further is we need to basically think in terms of two things. Number one, if I look at how much I've sold during the course of, say, a month, I also ideally need to know what is the composition of those sales. So what are the customer groups that make up that sale? What are the product groups that make up that sale? What are the service groups? Now, if you're sitting at home thinking, come on, Mahmood, just give us a bit more insight to what you're referring to here. Again, one way to look at this is by way of example. Now, I'm going to take 2 or 3 different types of business. We're going to go from the private type business to the not-for-profit social enterprise business, just to demonstrate this has a universal application. In a future broadcast, by the way, I'm going to hint at it today, going to this level of detail lends itself to actually a real powerful Aladdin's cave of information and things that you can do to really generate immense value for your business. It also enables you to do things here which are going to be more obvious as I go through these examples. So let's imagine, for example, our hospitality business. Now, typically in our hospitality business, we will be selling a variety of things. So we might typically have a product group, which we generically call beer, and that will be made up of draft, keg beer, bottled beer, etc. But we've got beers. In addition, we might also categorize another product group as wines and spirits. Again, that's another product group. That's another way that we drive that revenue. And let's say third thing first, let's say for convenience sake, we also are a hospitality venue that sells food as well. Now within food, I could break it down further. So I've got 3 clusters, 3 groups that make up my sales value. Now let's go to a different type of business. And if you're sitting there thinking, okay, Memo, that sounds like a lot of hard work. What's the value and the benefit? And more importantly, how do I figure out those groups? Just bear with me for a few moments and I'll give you that insight. Let's go to another type of business. So if I'm a service-based business, so I run an accounting business, I run an accounting firm, I've run it for 26 years. I've got a good team that make up that here. And in our business, in our practice, we do a variety of work. So just nothing sort of state secret here. So I might look at the work that we do and say, well, we do, for example, personal tax returns. That's potentially one product group. We also do what we call business support. So those are things like we provide online information for companies. We produce management accounts for them. We help them make decisions. We help them plug in with a system. And that could be a different customer group. I also do in my practice tax planning. So whether it's personal tax, inheritance tax, capital gain, property, whatever, it doesn't matter. That's another cluster. I'll just add one more. Again, I'm a big believer in terms of spreadsheets are great. I love spreadsheets, but to run your business on, they're a waste of time. You need to go cloud. So again, another type of service that we would offer is actually telling companies, if you want to convert from whatever you've got into a new system that gives you that power, that gives you that engine to run your business, then we've got a service that does that. Now, this is not just to advertise what I'm doing in my business, but that's just to show you those 4 clusters that I could develop for my own practice. Now, if I move across, let's go to the, for example, the arts sector, the arts field. Now, I've worked in the arts sector for about 35, 40 years as both a trustee, advisor, as well as getting paid for the work that I do in that sector. Now, if I'm a theatre company, it might typically be, if I look at what I do, I just don't have one lump of an audience. The different shows there might be live shows, there might be touring shows, there might be different customer audience types there in terms of by demographics, by age, where they're located. So what I'm thinking of, the money that comes into my business is made up of a number of different beasts. If we think of one that we can all immediately associate with, think about supermarkets. If you go into supermarkets, if you look at that as a box, in that supermarket space, you've got products that are typically like maybe fresh food. You might have, say, meat products. You may have dairy. You may have household electricals, all those different groups. Now, my advice is you need to think of your business and you need to articulate those different income streams into those product groups here. Now, the question is why? Well, because all those different product groups, believe it or not, will not all be generating the same sales value, which I think is largely not irrelevant, but not really the main focus of our business, but actually they will be generating different levels of gross profitability. So when you sell fresh food, fresh dairy produce, if you sell household electricals, that group, for every £100 of sales, will not be generating the same level of gross profit. Anyone who delivers, who's selling, say, beers, wines and spirits in a hospitality arena will not be making the same gross profit in beers as they do in wines and spirits. You know, it's natural. That's what happens. In my own practice, I will not be making the same level of profitability, gross profitability that is, from tax planning compared to something like personal tax returns. So you've got a whole mix of products, each contributing a different level of gross profitability. Now, if you don't have that in your business, again, maybe a show for another day, you need to make sure you get your act together and you need to structure your system that it captures the data at that level. In a few moments, by the way, I will show you some of the number crunching, but all I want us to do now, right, is to initially think about gross profit, what it represents. Number 2, how we measure it. And number 3, linking it to our business. We just don't want to do it overall. We want to break it down into our different product or service clusters. Now let's move on. Now, again, I'm a big fan of visuals here, and this is why, for me, gross profit is such a powerful financial barometer. It gives you such insight and it measures the health of your business in a number of different ways. Now, what I want you to do is to visualize for your own business. Now, you will have costs. So you will have some costs in your business that will remain relatively static. So whether you have 0 customers, whether you sell to 1,000, whatever your business activity, some costs remain largely unaltered. Those are called sometimes your fixed costs. You might call them overheads. Doesn't really matter, but you've got a level of cost. So if you imagine a cost tank, so here we have a level of cost there. Every time you sell a product, every time you deliver a service, every time somebody engages with you and buys something off you, each of those sales transactions, you get a gross profit droplet coming into your business. Now, if this works, bang. Isn't that beautiful, ladies and gentlemen? Aren't you impressed with my design work and my ability to use PowerPoint here? So every time you sell something, visualize a droplet of gross profit comes into your cost tank. Now, primary objective is to obviously make sure you generate enough gross profit to cover all those committed costs, to cover your rent, to cover the salary costs of your team, to cover your own wages, by the way. Now, paying yourself has got to be factored in there. Paying everything that is there to run your business, to support your business. Now, I don't like the word overhead, generally speaking, by the way, because it implies that it's a redundant, unnecessary cost. Every single business, from the market trader to the multinational business, needs some costs invested to support and give infrastructure. So you imagine a hospital, doctors and nurses are really key, but if you don't have ancillary staff, if you don't have the support team in the X-ray department, you can't run that business. In our restaurant type business, hospitality, if you don't have front of house, maitre d', cleaners, then you won't be able to run your restaurant correctly. If you work in a pub, if you don't have somebody cleaning it, keeping the toilets clean, the standard of hygiene, perhaps waiting, clearing glasses, etc., then you're not going to really be able to run an effective pub there as well. So every single business needs that infrastructure support and also people involved in the direct delivery of the products, services itself. So your objective is generate enough value to fill that tank. Once you cover that tank, by the way, that is basically your break even, which I'm going to show in another context later on in this presentation. Now, the last thing I want to mention before we go into the world of calculations and numbers to demonstrate this, and here it comes, as if by magic, is a ratio. Now, if maths is not your strong point, can I just point out, by the way, appreciating the power of numbers, using numbers in your business does not require you to be mathematically numerate. It requires you just to be aware and conscious of that. All the heavy lifting, all the number crunching is made much easier for you by a blend of technology and obviously an awareness of what's going on. But what I want you to do is to think about your gross profit and actually think of it in what I call a ratio, a proportionate term. Now, this for me gives you great insight. So typically in my hospitality business, if I look at the price of an optic, the price of a pint of beer, I'm probably going to give away the fact that I haven't been into a pub for quite a long time. I know not many people have in recent times. Hopefully that will be rectified soon. So if I sell a pint for, say, a couple of quid, if it costs me, say, I don't know, £1 to buy in, that's the equivalent cost to me of that pint of beer, then in pound note terms, that's £1 per pint. These numbers, by the way, are not realistic and representative, but I will give you some insight to what the margins are. So if I look at it proportionate terms, 50% of that sales value is my gross profit. Now, gross margin percent, as it's called, is a powerful number because it can tell you for your level of sales how much that will be gross profit for you. So that's your gross profit ratio. Typically, it's expressed as a percentage. Now, let's just pause for a moment there and let's have a look now visually about the power where those numbers can be used, not just for saying what's going on. Certainly understanding where you are at the moment is fantastic, but it's about what can I do with that information once I've got that. Now, if this works, I'm just going to head over to here, to my website, and what you can see in front of you, ladies and gentlemen. So again, if you want to alleviate your brain from the number crunching, but you sort of focus on using these numbers here. If you head over to the website, proactiveresolutions.com, if you look in the resources section, you'll see a bunch of calculators there. More will be added. So what I'm going to show you here is, first one is what's called a profit margin and pricing calculator. Now, we are going to talk about pricing in a bit more detail towards the end of the broadcast, but I'm too excited here not to share this with you at this stage of the game. So let's first of all see how we work it out. So what we've got a situation that, again, if you're a retailer, if you are a manufacturer, or if you're somebody who provides a business, what you want to do ultimately is to think about, what do you think the cost to you is of the item itself? Now, typically when you type in the cost, if you're VAT registered, make sure you include for the cost the excluding VAT number. So let's assume here this item has cost me £5. Now I'll demonstrate with and without VAT. Let's assume you're not VAT registered at the moment. You may have noticed at the bottom of the screen the numbers appearing on the screen for you. So the calculator is doing all the hard work for you. You need to focus on what the outputs are, the results. Now, if you notice in the box here, there are two options here. There's something called markup, there's something called margin. So in some sectors, markup is still applied. And what that means is you take the cost of the product and you add something to the cost to give you your selling price. It has a lot of advantages. It has a lot of drawbacks. I've got a podcast, a blog coming out on Monday about this here. But again, it's still practiced quite a lot there as well. So let's assume, for argument's sake, I want to add as much to that cost to give me the selling price. So I'm going to add £5. Now, if you look at the bottom, so in fact, let's make that proper if I can actually type. So effectively, what it is, my profit markup, if I could actually listen to what I'm saying, it's 100%. So what that says is, the cost to me is £5. I'm going to add as much again to that cost. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, it says the price to the customer is £10. If you're not VAT registered, then obviously that's the selling price. And if you look at the bottom, it tells you your cash profit. Now, if you notice also, you'll see a figure called margin, and the margin figure is lower because what it's doing is taking that £5 per item and it's expressing that as a percentage of the selling price. Now, my personal view is I'm not a big fan of markup. I think it has a lot of merits to that. But again, it is still widely used. So whatever way you do it, just be consistent. Now, let's assume, again, you're a retailer and you might want to say, well, actually, what I'm doing in my business, I want to set myself a target margin. So typically, if I'm selling optics and beer and wines and spirits or selling food, I need to know, okay, in terms of pricing, I want to make a certain target margin. So I'm going to take that out. Let's say, for example, here, put in the 50%. Let's say I want to make slightly more. So again, certain businesses require much more. So if I go there, that's £5 there. Put that in there. That's that. There we go. So as we can see there, with a 60% margin, your selling price moves to £12.50. Now, one of the things that I'm trying to do here is not to say, oh, this does the calculations, but it's about how we can use that. Now, if you wish to drive up your margin, you can play around with the cost to see what your selling price is. I've got another calculator to show you, if you're looking to increase sales, what you can do. So that's one way to calculate it. Let's assume we were VAT registered, by the way. So typically, if you're VAT registered and you're a retailer, then the price the customer sees is what's called the VAT inclusive price. So let's add 20% VAT rates. And therefore, as you can see, the selling price moves up to £15 because that would include the VAT that you need to charge to your end customer. So again, that's one way of doing the numbers. You're looking not only where you stand at the moment, but it gives you the ability to play around to decide what you need to move to if you've got a target market margin and markup in mind, which, for me, you need to drive your business forward. Now, we talked about break even and discounting. I'm going to come back to that later on. What I'd like to do is just go back to the last couple of slides to carry on talking about where gross profit lends itself to be really powerful in your business. So let's come out of that. Let's go back to the the slides. There we go. So if we go back here, everybody, come back in there. There we go. So we talked about that. Now this is another one I want to talk about. Now this is break even. So for me, if you're in business, you need to understand where you are in terms of what do you need to sell just to stand still. Now visually, this is what break even looks like. And I'm going to show you in a few moments about how you can calculate break even and how you can use that in your business to make lots of wonderful decisions. So typically, if you can see those two beautiful lines there, when what you sell covers all your costs, you've broken even. Once you start selling beyond that point, then you're making profit. Anything below that point is a loss. Okay, nothing really dramatic there. And that's what you've got to do. What we're going to look at is how we identify it, calculate it, and do something to improve it. Now, if you look here, on the chart, I've scribbled something or typed it, something called margin of safety. So typically, if your business is normally sells a certain volume, a certain level of sales, your break-even point should not obviously be at that same level, otherwise you've got challenges. So the difference between what you normally sell or what you set yourself out to sell as a target and where you break even is called your margin of safety. It's like a cushion. So that's how much you can afford to drop your sales, how much you can afford to lose your sales, not that you consciously wish to, before you start losing money. Obviously, what you're after in a business is to have a big margin of safety. The bigger the cushion, the more comfortable things are, the less risk you're exposed to. How you improve that break even will be typically cost control, both in terms of and also what you sell it in terms of. So that's your break even. Again, for me, absolute must. You need that to know what that is in your business. And again, all these figures that are coming forward, by the way, if you're running your business, they should be relatively available to you, quite easily. If you're relying on your financial accounts to run your business, again, I would suggest you're missing a trick and it's a rubbish way to run your business. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip into the next one. I'm not going to overbuild here. So let's have a look here. So this will be done live. So I've got a business. If I look at my rent, my rates, my salary costs, the wages I pay myself, every year they cost me about 10 grand. Now I've got a business. I've identified the costs that fluctuate, my accrued cost of sales. And let's say that's a £5. Each item sells for 10 quid. I'm going to take that out. Now, if you look down there, what you'll see is at the bottom, it'll identify there what the break-even point is, and the break-even point in value is 20 grand. I've put dollars, by the way, because I've got clients and people outside the UK who dip into these things. So I'm going to take dollars as the international currency, which I know obviously sterling isn't. But so I've expressed it in dollars, so you hope you can forgive me. So that's $20,000, or in numbers, number of items, that's 2,000 items I need to sell. Now, if you notice there, by the way, the margin of safety, the cushion, is actually negative. Well, it would be, because at that level, to break even, you've got to do 20 grand. I've arbitrarily set my sales target, my normal sales, at $12,000, which means I'm not actually doing enough to get to break even. So it's going to be a negative number. So let's change the figures. Let's make that 120,000. That's the target I've set myself. That's the budget, or what I normally sell. The margin of safety goes up in terms of value to 100 grand. The margin of safety is 10,000. Now, obviously, I just don't want to break even in my business, even though that might have to happen in the early stages if it's a new startup, a new pivot. But I've got aspirations to make profit, and all business owners should have that aspiration embedded in. Let's say I decide to make myself a target profit on top to cover a reward to me, to cover paying all the staff, sort of financial rewards. And let's say I want to make a target profit of 100 grand. If I've got enough zeros there, put that in. And bang, it will work it out for you at the bottom to tell you what your sales needs to be. Now, you might be thinking, well, Maroon, I'm not going to sit down all day playing around with numbers, but look at it, what we're trying to do. If you set yourself a target, you've got yourself a goal. You've got yourself a route map you can break it down into to what you need to sell to get to that position. So again, that's another snapshot. Now, the last thing, ladies and gentlemen, and what I want to talk about to dip out my toe into the water is on pricing. I'm going to share some thoughts with you on pricing, and I've got another broadcast coming up on pricing specifically. We're going to dive into it a little bit more deeply. So let's get back to our little chart. We talked about break even. And bang. Break even, as we said. Fixed costs in relation to your gross margin. And bang, there's your break even point. Okay. Now, pricing. Now, this is a mere flavor. So for pricing, how much do I charge to my customers for my products, my services, for my time, is something that is not a formulaic approach. Three things that you need to factor in that need to come together. One is, what's your objective? So marketing, what are your marketing objectives? What are your business objectives? Pricing supports that. Number two, you need to be aware of what your numbers are saying, because whatever pricing approach you're doing, it's got to lend itself to actually generating profitability, not just in the short term, but in the long term. Number three, a bit of psychology that comes into it. Now, this is just a flavor, a sample of some of the pricing approaches you can adopt. So I've put four, there are about 25 plus different models, different approaches. So target pricing is to go based on what your customer is willing to pay. And that in turn, you can work backwards to work out how much things need to cost you to deliver to make a profit. Value-based is based on the transformation you're giving to that client, the pain that you're solving, the price. So it's not just purely based on cost, but it's valued based on the transformation of, that you're giving to the client, the pains you're solving, the solutions you provide. Penetration pricing sounds intriguing, doesn't it? Well, that's deliberately where you want to gain market share. So you deliberately set your price at a relatively low point compared to maybe your competitors, because you want to gain sales volume. You want to gain market share. There are some pluses and minuses. Some of the drawbacks are it may be very difficult to move the cost, to move the selling price up as time goes on. Secondly, you may be attracting cost-conscious buyers. But if we look at the larger landscape, it's worked very well. So Ryanair, EasyJet, that low pricing point, what they have to look for is being very efficient with their operations. They make cost efficiencies. But again, typically, if you're going for large volumes, it actually may perversely lead to actually greater profitability because of your fixed cost. And competitive pricing is where you just set yourself as everybody else. So you use your competitors as a benchmark and you set your prices based on that. Those are typically like market-based pricing mechanisms. Within whatever you choose, and it's very usual for a company and a business to have a variety of these options in their toolkit. Now, cost-based pricing is, as it says, if you know what the cost of a product is, the cost of delivering a service, then you just add something to that. Now, again, it's easy, it's simple. It means you recoup that cost as long as you can sell the product, but it can lead to inefficiencies. You could be out of step with the rest of the marketplace. You don't have that incentive to challenge your cost there. But again, those are still mechanisms that are used quite widely. Again, treat with caution. You typically will have a blend of these in your toolkit. And what I'm going to do, everybody, is just to finish off with another sample of a calculator. Hopefully I'm not doing your head in with these variety of calculators. It's just reinforcing the fact, there is something there to take the number crunching out of you. So we'll come back to that in a moment. We'll do the wrap up later. Let's go back to our calculators. So if you have a look at this one here, now I like this one. Well, I like them all actually, because this has got a bit of a slider. So again, this is using your knowledge of your business and establishing some pricing. And this one is a discount calculator. So this is saying, I wish to grow the volume of sales I'm doing. I wish to get more customers. And I think based on what I'm doing, I thought about lots of options and I want to offer an inducement. Let's use that word discounting. I'm going to use discounting as one of my techniques and tactics with my marketing messages to gain more market volume, more market share, to sell more products. Could be your product's coming to the end of its line, so you want to shift it completely, and you're playing around with the discounts. Now, here's how it works. You've got basically 5 numbers that you've got to key in. And when I say key in, use your slider. So at the top, if you're VAT registered, and the reason I introduced the VAT component, by the way, because if you're a retailer that's having this conversation in your business, then your prices are normally quoted, including VAT, to your end customer. If you're not VAT registered, then obviously leave it blank. Here, and this is per item or per group of items. Let's say typically £100 is the price of my item currently. Let's keep it nice and simple. In fact, let's make it 120. Actually, I'll demonstrate why. 120. Let's slide it there. Let's say, for example, the cost is 60. But this is where I stand at the moment. So I can see at the bottom, I'm making a £60 profit per item or group of items. That's generating a margin of 50%. So for every £120 worth of sales on that product, then half of that will be the gross profit that I get to keep to go into my cost bucket to cover those costs. Fantastic. Now, what I've decided to do, I want to enter into a marketing initiative, a campaign, and I want to grow the volume of sales. I want to get more customers because there's a lot of merit in having more audiences, more clients that I can sell more stuff to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with this. Now at the bottom, let's assume we give a 10% discount to our customers. Now, if you look at it by power of magic, if your objective is to do that and you want to know what your sales level has got to be to make the same cash profit as you did before, then what that says is 2 things. As soon as you discount, reduce the selling price, assuming there's no movement in your cost price, there's no advantage from suppliers, which there will typically be, but let's assume simplicity, no movement in cost, then your profit per item would drop as you would expect. Your percentage margin would drop as a result, and you need to sell 25% more to be in the same position as in cash terms. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't go ahead, but you need to have that relationship, I think, embedded in your mind. If you're VAT registered, by the way, let's put that in, 20% VAT. Let's go back to £120. And all that's showing is, because that £120 includes VAT, you're going to have to shift a lot more product in order to have the same cash profit. Now remember, this is a consideration. It's not the final arbiter or decision. Well, folks, that's a bit of a run through there. Hope that's been useful. I'm just going to share a few more things with you before I let you go on your Saturday afternoon. So in terms of, if you want to have a look at a bit more data, information, resources, check us out on the website there, obviously. I do a weekly podcast. I've had my year anniversary gone, so still going, called I Hate Numbers, where we cover a variety of topics for SME businesses and the like on a variety of topics. I don't hate numbers, by the way, but I know lots of business owners do. What else I was going to say, now, obviously, next week, it's fun time, isn't it? Because it's the budget coming out. So for that, next week's show is going to cover some of the things coming out of the budget. It affects all businesses. Some people have got some predictions coming up. I've got my own thoughts on that, which I'm going to share over the next few days. If you fancy grabbing some of these tools, check out the website. I'll share some links in the comments box afterwards. So all I would suggest that you do, guys, is from this, go back to your own businesses, think about what you sell. Think about categorizing those products into groups, into clusters. And let's see if you can figure out what you're making per moment at the moment on those product groups, on those clusters. And do you want to make more? Well, the next stage then is to make those decisions about how you improve that margin. So aggregate is okay, break it down. But for me, the takeaway is look at your gross profit, manage it, measure it, improve it, and you're halfway there. Okay, folks, thank you very much for your time. I'm actually going to toodle off now, get back to my desk and day job. And apart from that, I'll see you guys next week. And I think I'm going to do is to play myself out with